Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. In the summer of 1983, Cocoa Beach, Florida was home to a rising star. Tami Lynn Leppert was everything Hollywood dreamed of, a successful model, actress, and beauty queen with over 300 pageant crowns to her name. She'd even landed roles in major films like Scarface. But beneath the glossy exterior, something was terribly wrong. In the weeks before she vanished, Tami became increasingly paranoid, convinced she'd witnessed something she shouldn't have. Then, on July 6th, the 18-year-old disappeared without a trace after being dropped off at a local parking lot. Was her paranoia justified? Did someone want to silence her? Tonight, we dive into one of Florida's most baffling cold cases. Let's begin. On a sweltering July morning in 1983, the small coastal community of Cocoa Beach, Florida, was about to become the setting for one of the state's most perplexing disappearances. Tami Lynn Leppert, a vibrant 18-year-old with flowing blonde hair and striking blue eyes, seemed to have everything going for her. She was beautiful, talented, and had already achieved more than most people twice her age. But on July 6th, she would vanish without a trace, leaving behind a web of questions that remain unanswered to this day. Tami wasn't your typical teenager. By the age of 4, she had already begun competing in beauty pageants, accumulating an impressive collection of over 300 crowns and trophies. Her mother, Linda Curtis, had carefully guided her daughter's career from an early age, helping her develop into a successful model and aspiring actress. By her teenage years, Tami had appeared in several commercials and even landed small roles in major Hollywood productions, including the 1982 film Spring Break and a brief appearance in Scarface alongside Al Pacino. But beneath the glossy surface of pageant smiles and camera flashes, something darker was brewing in Tami's world. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, those closest to her noticed alarming changes in her behavior. She became increasingly paranoid, expressing fears that someone was trying to harm her. Her mother would later recall how Tami had become convinced that she had witnessed something she shouldn't have during the filming of Spring Break the previous year. One particularly disturbing incident occurred during the filming of Scarface. While on set, Tami reportedly had a severe emotional breakdown during a scene involving fake blood. She became hysterical and had to be removed from the set, reportedly screaming about violence and murder. This episode marked a significant turning point in her mental state, according to those who knew her. Friends and family members reported that Tami began having trouble sleeping. She would stay awake for days at a time, pacing nervously and expressing fears about being watched. She spoke of conspiracy theories and became increasingly convinced that someone was plotting against her. Her mother noted that Tami would check and recheck the locks on doors and windows, sometimes multiple times per hour. On July 1st, just 5 days before her disappearance, Tami had a severe anxiety attack at a restaurant. She became convinced that her food had been poisoned and refused to eat. Her behavior was so concerning that her mother took her to a mental health professional, but Tami refused to discuss her fears in detail with the therapist. The morning of July 6th started like any other. Tami left her home around 11 a.m. in the company of a male acquaintance named Keith Roberts. According to Roberts' later statements to police, Tami had asked him to drive her to a local bank. He claimed that after visiting the bank, they had a minor disagreement, and at Tami's request, he dropped her off at a parking lot near Cocoa Beach's Glass Bank building. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Tami Lynn Leppert. When Tami failed to return home that evening, her mother immediately knew something was wrong. It was completely out of character for Tami not to contact her family, especially given her recent anxious state. Linda Curtis contacted the police that same night to report her daughter missing, but law enforcement initially treated it as a potential runaway case, despite Linda's insistence that something more sinister had occurred. The investigation would reveal several troubling details. Tami had left behind all her personal belongings, including her purse, identification, and the money she had just withdrawn from the bank. She was last seen wearing a blue denim skirt, a white blouse, and sandals, clothing that seemed inappropriate for someone planning to run away. Keith Roberts, the last person to see Tami, was questioned multiple times by police. His account remained consistent, but some aspects of his story raised questions. For instance, he claimed Tami had become upset during their drive, but couldn't or wouldn't provide specific details about what had triggered the disagreement. Surveillance footage from the bank confirmed that Tami had made a withdrawal that morning, but the cameras didn't capture what happened afterward. As days turned into weeks, the investigation began to uncover more about Tami's state of mind in the months leading up to her disappearance. Several of her friends came forward with accounts of conversations that now seemed ominous in retrospect. One friend recalled Tami confiding that she had witnessed something terrible during the filming of Spring Break, though she never specified what it was. Another friend reported that Tami had become increasingly interested in investigating local drug trafficking operations, claiming she had information about criminal activities in the area. Whether these interests were related to her paranoia or based on real observations remains unclear. The investigation also revealed that Tami had made several cryptic phone calls in the weeks before she vanished. Phone records showed multiple calls to unknown numbers, and she had reportedly told her mother that she needed to talk to someone important about something she had seen. The nature of these calls and the identity of the recipients were never determined. Law enforcement explored multiple angles. They investigated possible connections to local criminal organizations, interviewed dozens of people associated with the film productions Tami had worked on, and looked into potential links to other missing persons cases in the area. But each lead seemed to lead to another dead end. One particularly intriguing aspect of the case emerged when investigators discovered that several other young women had disappeared from the Central Florida area during the same time period. While no direct connections were ever established between these cases and Tami's disappearance, the pattern was concerning enough to warrant further investigation. The case took an even more bizarre turn when anonymous letters began arriving at the Cocoa Beach Police Department, claiming knowledge of Tami's fate. These letters, which continued to arrive sporadically for several months after her disappearance, contained details that hadn't been released to the public. However, despite extensive forensic analysis, the authors of these letters were never identified, and the information they contained couldn't be verified. As the investigation stretched into months, Linda Curtis refused to give up hope. She organized searches, distributed flyers, and appeared on local television shows pleading for information about her daughter. The case began to attract national attention, featured on programs like Unsolved Mysteries and various true crime documentaries. Each new appearance brought fresh leads, but none provided the breakthrough the investigation desperately needed. One of the most compelling theories to emerge involved potential connections to Christopher Wilder, a serial killer known as the Beauty Queen Killer, who had been active in Florida during the early 1980s. Wilder had a pattern of targeting young models and aspiring actresses, and his known activities placed him in Florida during the time of Tami's disappearance. While investigators never found concrete evidence linking Wilder to Tami's case, the similarities were striking enough to warrant serious investigation. The investigation also delved deeper into Tami's claims about witnessing something disturbing during the filming of Spring Break. Production crew members were re-interviewed, and investigators pored over shooting schedules and location information. Several crew members recalled Tami spending time around the peripheral areas of the set, where she might have observed activities unrelated to the film's production. However, no one could corroborate any specific incident that might have triggered her fears. In 1984, a potential breakthrough emerged when a witness came forward claiming to have seen Tami getting into a green Chevrolet Nova on the day of her disappearance. This account conflicted with Keith Roberts' statement about dropping her off at the Glass Bank building. When confronted with this new information, Roberts maintained his original story, insisting he had no knowledge of a green Nova or Tami's subsequent movements. The investigation also uncovered troubling details about Tami's final bank withdrawal. While the amount wasn't substantial, just over $100, bank employees remembered her appearing agitated and constantly looking over her shoulder. One teller recalled Tami saying something about needing the money just in case, though she didn't elaborate on what she meant. Linda Curtis began conducting her own parallel investigation, gathering information from Tami's friends and acquaintances. Through these efforts, she discovered that Tami had been keeping a diary in the months leading up to her disappearance. However, the diary was never found among her belongings, raising questions about whether she had taken it with her or if someone had removed it from her room. Some of Tami's friends came forward with new information about her mental state in the final weeks. One friend, who wished to remain anonymous, revealed that Tami had spoken about going to Miami to meet someone who could help her. The friend didn't know who this person was, but remembered Tami saying it was related to something she had seen during her time in the film industry. The investigation also explored possible connections to organized crime in the area. During the early 1980s, Florida's Space Coast was experiencing an uptick in drug trafficking activity, with several small airports and marinas providing convenient entry points for smugglers. Some speculated that Tami might have inadvertently witnessed illegal activities related to these operations. In 1985, 2 years after Tami's disappearance, a fisherman found a woman's clothing washed up on a beach about 20 miles south of Cocoa Beach. The items included a white blouse similar to the one Tami was wearing when she vanished. However, due to exposure to salt water and sun, forensic testing couldn't definitively link the clothing to Tami. The case took another turn when investigators received information about suspicious activity at an abandoned property near where Tami was last seen. Local teenagers reported seeing unusual late-night activity there around the time of her disappearance. A thorough search of the property, including ground-penetrating radar, revealed nothing conclusive, but added another layer of mystery to the case. By 1986, the official investigation had largely gone cold, but Linda Curtis continued her relentless pursuit of answers. She hired private investigators, consulted psychics, and maintained contact with law enforcement agencies across the country. Her efforts led to several new leads, including a possible sighting of Tami in California in 1987, but none of these leads produced concrete results. The case also drew attention from various missing persons organizations, who noted similarities between Tami's disappearance and other cases involving young women in the entertainment industry. These organizations helped maintain public awareness of the case and provided valuable resources for continuing the investigation. One particularly interesting development came from a former film industry worker who contacted investigators in 1988. This individual claimed to have overheard conversations about Tami during a film production in Miami, suggesting that some people in the industry might have knowledge about her disappearance. However, when pressed for more specific information, the witness became evasive and eventually stopped cooperating with investigators. As the years passed, new investigative techniques and technologies offered fresh opportunities to examine the case. DNA testing became more sophisticated, and cold case units periodically reviewed the evidence. Investigators also began exploring possible connections to other unsolved cases from the same time period, looking for patterns or similarities that might have been overlooked. The advent of the internet and social media brought new attention to Tami's case. Online communities dedicated to solving cold cases began analyzing the available evidence, generating new theories and perspectives. While many of these theories remained speculative, they helped keep the case in the public eye and occasionally produced new leads for investigators to pursue. One persistent theory that emerged through these online investigations involved possible connections to human trafficking operations known to be active in Florida during the early 1980s. Given Tami's youth and beauty, some investigators considered this a plausible scenario, though no concrete evidence ever emerged to support it. By the early 1990s, Tami's case had become one of Florida's most enduring mysteries. Linda Curtis had transformed her grief into activism, working with various organizations to improve how law enforcement handled missing persons cases. Her efforts helped implement new protocols for investigating disappearances, particularly those involving young women in the entertainment industry. In 1993, a former police informant came forward with information suggesting that Tami's disappearance might have been connected to a cocaine trafficking operation that had been active in Brevard County during the early 1980s. According to this source, several members of the operation had connections to both the film industry and local entertainment venues where Tami had worked. While investigators found the information credible enough to pursue, the passage of time and the deaths of several potential witnesses made it impossible to fully verify these claims. The case took another interesting turn in 1995 when a woman in Tampa contacted authorities claiming to have important information about Tami's disappearance. She stated that her ex-husband, now deceased, had been involved in organized crime activities around Cocoa Beach in 1983 and had mentioned Tami's name during drunken conversations. According to this witness, her ex-husband had implied that Tami had been silenced after witnessing something she shouldn't have. However, without the ability to question the ex-husband directly, investigators couldn't substantiate these claims. One of the most significant developments came in 1998 when investigators began re-examining Tami's mental state prior to her disappearance. Mental health experts reviewing the case suggested that her paranoia might not have been entirely unfounded. They pointed out that her symptoms were consistent with someone who had genuinely witnessed a traumatic event, rather than purely delusional behavior. This analysis led to a fresh review of the spring break film production records and interviews with additional crew members who hadn't previously been questioned. During this review, investigators discovered that several sections of the production's daily logs from the period when Tami claimed to have witnessed something disturbing were missing. While this could have been simple mismanagement of records, the timing raised suspicions. Additionally, 3 other crew members from the production had died under various circumstances in the years following the film's completion, though no direct connections to Tami's case could be established. In 2001, advances in digital forensics allowed investigators to enhance surveillance footage from the bank where Tami made her final withdrawal. The enhanced images showed more detail of her interaction with Keith Roberts in the parking lot. While the footage didn't reveal anything definitively suspicious, body language experts noted that Tami appeared to be in a state of high anxiety, repeatedly looking over her shoulder and maintaining physical distance from Roberts. The case gained renewed attention in 2003 when a true crime documentary series featured Tami's story. The program generated hundreds of new tips, including one from a former drug trafficker who claimed that several law enforcement officers in Brevard County had been on the payroll of drug organizations during the early 1980s. This information raised troubling questions about whether the original investigation might have been compromised. Linda Curtis passed away in 2005, never knowing what happened to her daughter. Before her death, she had compiled an extensive collection of documents, photographs, and potential leads related to Tami's case. This archive, which filled several filing cabinets, was donated to a missing persons advocacy group and continues to be a valuable resource for investigators. In 2008, cold case investigators began using new geographic profiling techniques to analyze patterns of criminal activity in Central Florida during the early 1980s. This analysis revealed several locations of interest, including an abandoned warehouse near the Glass Bank building where Tami was last seen. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of these locations produced some anomalies, but subsequent excavations failed to uncover any evidence related to the case. The emergence of social media in the 2010s brought new attention to Tami's case. Several Facebook groups dedicated to solving her disappearance have accumulated thousands of members, some of whom have conducted their own investigations. While many of their theories remain speculative, these online communities have helped keep the case active and occasionally generated useful leads for law enforcement. Today, nearly 4 decades after Tami Lynn Leppert vanished, her case remains one of Florida's most puzzling mysteries. The original case files fill dozens of boxes, containing hundreds of interviews, tips, and possible leads. Yet despite the extensive investigation, key questions remain unanswered. What did Tami witness during the filming of Spring Break that caused her such distress? Was her paranoia justified? And perhaps most importantly, what happened to her after Keith Roberts dropped her off that July morning? The case continues to intrigue new generations of investigators and true crime enthusiasts. Some focus on the potential connections to organized crime, while others explore the possibilities of serial killer involvement or human trafficking. The truth may lie somewhere in between these theories, or in some as yet undiscovered explanation. What we do know is that somewhere in the sun-drenched streets of Cocoa Beach, a beautiful young woman with dreams of stardom vanished without a trace, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and a case that continues to challenge our understanding of how someone could simply disappear in broad daylight. Tami Lynn Leppert's case remains open, and investigators continue to follow new leads as they emerge, hoping that someday someone will come forward with the information needed to finally solve this enduring mystery.